Hey YouTube, this is Adam back for video number 2. Wasn't planning on making another video, but got really good feedback about the first video, so I decided to cover the Goldman Sachs Global Healthcare Conference that Crispr Therapeutics participated in late last week. What I'm going to cover in this video is just the new content I heard, not the content that they overviewed that has been overviewed in the past, because I don't want to make this video too long. So let's start with the in vivo section of the conference. There was some really big in vivo news. They mentioned they'll be talking about new in vivo data at CRISPR Therapeutics Innovation Day, which is going to be coming up during this business week. So this is very exciting because that means new data is right around the corner, and it's always exciting when new data is coming up. So specifically, they mentioned that the in vivo data would be for the liver programs, and we've heard the CRISPR CEO mention this a couple times. The person that was talking in this conference was COO Lawrence Clyde. This is the first time I've actually listened to Lawrence Clyde. I don't know if he's done events in the past, but I don't think he's done any events in the past year because I've been following the company quite closely. So they did mention they'll have data for the liver programs next week. I also hope maybe they mention something about their DMD data, as we know that Vertex recently gave them a milestone payment of $200 million. So hopefully they've made some good progress in getting closer to that IND filing. There was a question about where their funding percentages was going, and this one pertained to in vivo because they mentioned that the in vivo programs are much more cost efficient than ex vivo. This seems like a pretty truthful comment, as the Intellia CEO also has said this in the past, referring to NTLA 2001, which is the therapeutic for their in vivo ATTR program for their in vivo liver pipeline, as I said, the ATTR pipeline. They mentioned it is much cheaper than ex vivo, and as you can imagine, it's probably because it's just an injectable editor, as opposed to taking the cell out of the human body, editing it, and putting it back into the human's body. You need the specialized facility to take the cell out of the body and actually run the edits. Lastly, summing up with the in vivo, they mentioned they feel close to IND filing on in vivo programs, and again, they mostly mentioned their liver in vivo programs, which is quite fantastic because this is the third reiteration that I've heard about these liver in vivo programs. The first two were from the CEO at other events earlier, and now this was from COO Lawrence Clyde about their liver in vivo program. And they haven't even put their liver in vivo programs on the early research part of their website. So I was a bit suspicious, but I like how they reiterated that they feel that it is close to IND filing. Clearly, they have run this one very fast, as they seem to have superseded some other programs. And in the past, they've talked about how originally they felt the strategy for in vivo delivering was quite far away, and then after seeing the Intellia data, they felt like they needed to catch up, specifically for the liver targets. So here they are, they're doing it. And they also mentioned that they feel their data is going to be within the competitive field, probably comparing it to Intellia's data. I'm really interested in what liver diseases they're targeting. So we will see. We'll see soon enough next week. They also talked about exocell. They mentioned many things about exocell, but I'll just mention the things that this is the first time I heard them say from the conference. So there was a question about the Bluebird Bio FDA communication and how they felt about the Bluebird Bio and FDA communication. And they said they felt optimistic because clearly the FDA showed there was a need for this therapeutic, for sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. And they also mentioned that their product has better efficacy and way less risk of insertional mutagenesis. So I think it's highly likely that CRISPR Therapeutics will also have good communication with the FDA, since it's right behind Bluebird and it seems to be a better product. This has a lot to do with not using a virus for the gene editing, or gene therapy is what they call it, and then CRISPR using CRISPR for the gene editing, so less likely for insertional mutagenesis. They also had a question about how far out is an in vivo target for sickle cell disease, and they mentioned that they don't believe that with current editor delivery technology that they can deliver a editor to where it would need to go to help with sickle cell disease, as it's much harder to target this area of the body as opposed to the liver. They also brought up the conditioning comment. So as we know, if there's a better conditioner, better than busulfan with exa-cel, then there's a much larger patient population that would be available for treatment. And we know that Vertex and CRISPR are both working on their own independent conditioning agents. And we also know that Magenta is working on a conditioning agent. This was the first time I heard them say that if Magenta came out with a good conditioning agent, that they would partner with them and get it into the clinic with a Magenta conditioning agent. So I thought that was kind of cool, because I hear Beam Therapeutics talk about that all the time. And again, CRISPR Therapeutics just doesn't seem to, as pitchy in their event calls, in my opinion, as opposed to Beam, who makes sense because they don't have any clinical trials going on, so they have to talk about their early research, where CRISPR has the clinical trials going on, so they have more to talk about. But I felt it was cool that they brought up Magenta, because I haven't heard them talk about that yet. And we know that they are also developing a conditional agent. They also actually talked about their immuno-oncology programs quite a bit. So they mentioned that they will share data for CTX120 for myeloma by the end of the month, which was news to me because I knew it was coming, but I didn't know it was by the end of the month. So that's quite exciting. They also mentioned they'll also show more data for CTX130, but this time for renal cell carcinoma by the end of the month. They mentioned the competitive field for CTX120 and how it was quite tough because of J&J's Carvicta therapeutic, which is very competitive. It's an autologous program, but it has an 80% CR rate, which, as we know, is quite high, and it will be a challenging product to match. And they mentioned that they would have to get one of these high CR rates at CTX120 for it to be competitive. So when we look at the data for CTX120 that we get before the end of the month, let's make sure it's at least close to 80% CR. It could technically be under, and there's this niche area where allogenic can be delivered to the patients quicker because, again, autologous needs to be taken out of the body, and it needs to put the CAR T on the cell and put back into the body, where allogenic is on the shelf and ready. But again, we need to have a high CR rate for CRISPR Therapeutics CTX120 for it to be competitive with the autologous therapies. They also reiterated, don't want to talk too much because they talk about this all the time, but CTX130 doesn't have much in terms of the competitors. So any type of complete response rate for CTX130 is quite competitive. They also had a question about CTX110, about how they felt they competed with allogenic and autologous programs. They said they felt on par with the other allogenic programs, which in my past video, I felt kind of the same way, comparing to Caribou Biosciences and Allogene for the CD19 CTX110 program. They felt that they needed to be better to compare with autologous programs. And I actually learned this in this video, but they said generally for the CAR T programs, what you look at is 6 months out and the complete response rate at 6 months out, which makes a lot of sense because complete response varies with time, so it makes sense you would choose a point in time to compare the products. And they said in order to be competitive with the autologous, they need to be better than 30% complete response rate 6 months out. And they said they're going to try to do this with dose reconsolidation, which we already know they're attempting to do that, and we've already seen some data with dose reconsolidation. They also mentioned that they have the stage 2 and stage 3 immuno-oncology programs. We know that they have the stage 2 and stage 3 immuno-oncology programs, so they reiterated that. The one thing that they mentioned that I felt was new was they mentioned 2 things they were going for with these edits. So they mentioned they're trying to enhance immunosuppression, or enhance immunoevasion or stealth of the cells, which I hadn't heard them say that one, but then they said the other edit was for enhancing potency, which I've definitely heard the CEO mention a lot about their stage 2 products. So it's quite nice they mentioned the stealth or enhancing the immunoevasion, because that's going to be particularly comparable to the durability, which is what we need to see better in those products. Lastly, they talked about VCTX210, which is their regenerative medicine pipeline for diabetes. And I actually heard several new things about this program. So, number one, they said at Innovation Day they might talk about the engraftment success of the VCTX210 cells without using immunosuppressants, which would be the first data we get to see from this. So this would just be see if the edits done on those cells are creating the immunosuppressants they need for engraftment. Another thing they actually mentioned, which was news to me, I don't know if they said this in the past, I've never heard it, is they mentioned that they would be in the future using an injectable program for type 1 diabetes instead of the encapsulated product. I think all of you guys listening probably know this is what Vertex Pharmaceuticals is doing, and we know that Vertex Pharmaceuticals is getting very good insulin production data. And the other thing they said is that they're looking to use stage 6 cells for the injectable product line that's going to be in the future. And as we know, Vertex Pharmaceuticals is using stage 6 cells, where VCTX, the ViaCyte CRISPR collaboration, is using stage 4 cells, and more mature cells might be what's accounting for the higher insulin production. So it seems like they are really following Vertex footsteps and are going to use a Vertex method of the straight injectable insulin production cells. These cells end up in the liver, and then they can interact with the vasculature in the liver. The difference is that Vertex hasn't started using immunosuppressants for their product line. Well, they're using immunosuppressants. I mean, they're not using a CRISPR edit to cause immunosuppression. And as far as I know, they don't have a CRISPR partner for immunosuppression yet. So that'll be interesting when CRISPR starts using this injectable method, and hopefully, for the investor's sake, they get comparable data to Vertex. They also mentioned another goal for one of the edits, which they reiterated because they've used this in the past, but in the future they said they'll make another additional edit to increase insulin production of these ViaCyte cells, because they realize, and I think this comment's coming from because they realize for insulin independence, these cells need to produce more insulin than they currently are. So they either need to, one, edit stage 4 cells to increase more insulin, or bump up to a more mature stage 6 cell that can have greater insulin production. Yeah, and that's kind of closing it off. They had a closing comment that just said that for Innovation Day, they feel very excited to present some in vivo data from one of their in vivo programs. I'd have to imagine it's going to be their liver program. From what they mentioned, it sounded like they're going to present some liver data. I really hope that they also present some of their DMD data. We'll find out this week, but I think Innovation Day sounds very exciting. And I think I'll probably do another video highlighting what is new that they presented in Innovation Day. So thanks for listening if you got this far in the video, and maybe I'll see you guys next time if I create another video. Thanks.